Hey, do you remember that time when you snuck into the terrorist headquarters to rescue a hostage while your friends distracted the terrorists with grenades and gunfire? Or that other time when you were fighting with your best friend Ken and you finished them off with a fireball dragon punch combo? Or that other time when you went around eating mushrooms and jumping on turtles to rescue the princess only to find out that she's in another castle? Those were some fun times. And then your mom had to go and spoil the mood by yelling at you to come and eat dinner. You know, sometimes parents just don't understand. Action games emphasize physical challenges. The majority of the earliest games are action games, such as Pac-Man, Space Invaders, and Pong. These games were so captivating at the time that an entire industry of video arcades was based around action games in the late 70s to early 80s, until the introduction of home console systems brought action games into the homes. Essentially, an action game is any game where you have to overcome challenges by physical means, such as with hand-eye coordination, a sense of rhythm, precise aim, or reaction time. With such a broad definition, there are many subgenres of action games, such as shooter games are games where you shoot at stuff. You might be shooting at Nazis with a shotgun, or taking down stormtroopers with a blaster rifle, or blasting fantastical beings while dodging a hail of bullets. Most shooters utilize twitch mechanics, which emphasize a combination of hand-eye coordination, reaction time, and rapid decision making. Not surprisingly, these are elements that action gamers tend to enjoy. Shooter games can be further classified by the viewpoint of the player, either first person or third person. First person shooters, or FPSs, have an on-screen view that simulates the in-game character's point of view. Although the main gameplay mechanic is simply to line up your target at the center of your crosshairs and then hit a key or click a button, game designers have taken this basic formula and created some amazing games with it. The earliest commercially successful FPS was probably Wolfenstein 3D, followed rapidly by other titles such as Doom, Quake, Half-Life, and Counter-Strike. The first-person view tends to increase the fantasy aspect of immersion, since the player feels like they are actually in the game rather than controlling a video game character. Many modern versions of such games include team-based online play, which addresses social gamers, even if this does open up the possibility of plenty of jokes about your mom. Third-person shooters are less common, but they are often games with a richer story. In third-person shooters, you are clearly playing as someone else because you can see the character you are controlling. As a result, the game can tell a compelling story about this specific character, which is another form of immersion. Prime examples include Tomb Raider, Uncharted, and Assassin's Creed, all of which have had multiple games in their series. And then there are shoot-'em-ups, affectionately known as shmups, which sounds like a really violent smurf. These are games that are usually in the third-person view, where the main gameplay is to shoot anything that moves. Different types of shmups include scrolling shooters like 1943 The Battle of Midway, or the Toho Bullet Hell series, run-and-gun games that combine shooters and platformers such as Contra or Metal Slug, and rail shooters like Virtual Cop or Time Crisis, popular in video arcades that use physical light guns. Of course, with all these games there is one common theme: shooting things. Pew pew! The main gameplay mechanism for platformers has the player controlling an avatar to jump between suspended platforms and avoiding obstacles. And since it's not necessarily easy to make sure your character lands on the correct platform while dodging barrels tossed by an overgrown monkey, platformers are favoured by gamers who enjoy achieving mastery of this physical challenge. The classic examples of platformers are Mario Bros. For the Nintendo and Sonic for the Sega. Both games are side-scrolling platformers where the challenge is to get to the end of the level while avoiding enemies and traps, and collecting a bunch of coins or rings along the way. This gameplay is so engaging that the Mario franchise is widely considered to be the best-selling video game franchise of all time. The classic platformer formula has been tweaked and adapted successfully in various ways. Endless runners like Temple Run are a special kind of rail game where the character is constantly advancing and has to continuously dodge obstacles along the way. There are also puzzle platformers that add in a puzzle element to include a more mental aspect of mastery. Games like Braid, with its time rewinding mechanic, or the amazingly cool Portal gun from Portal, require you to use your brains to figure out the way past the level, instead of simply rewarding the player for good reflexes. Besides, there's cake afterwards. Before guns and weapons were invented, people had to resort to hitting each other directly. For some reason, human beings throughout history have found gladiatorial combat and other forms of fistfights entertaining. Even today, we have boxing contests and mixed martial arts events getting viewership in the millions, so it is no wonder that fighting games are still popular. The game that probably started off the entire genre is the wildly successful Street Fighter II, which featured a multinational cast of characters fighting in an underground tournament. This was followed by games like The King of Fighters and Mortal Kombat, which popularized gory finishing moves and bad spelling. Games like Tekken and Virtua Fighter introduced a 3D aspect, but the gameplay was essentially the same. The classic fighting game has the player controlling a character that engages another character in close combat. Other than the basic kicks and punches, the characters in these games can do special, more powerful moves by doing specific combinations of joystick shifts and button presses called combos. Since combos can be complex, players have spent countless hours and coins in the arcades practicing and mastering these moves. Some commentators have claimed that if the players are equally and highly skilled, fighting games are just elaborate forms of rock, paper, scissors. And while there is some truth in that, in fighting games, you get to, virtually, beat your opponent into a bloody pulp, thereby indulging in the excitement and thrill of destruction that action gamers tend to enjoy. Wholesome family entertainment. There are a whole bunch of other subgenres under the action game category. Brawler games like Golden Axe and the Simpsons arcade game are usually side-scrolling games popular in the 80s and early 90s, where the player beats up on an improbably large number of opponents, sort of how the bad guys in old kung fu movies tend to attack the hero one by one. Maze games like the classic Pac-Man and Super Bomberman, where the game was situated in a maze, were also popular in the last century. The Binding of Isaac is a modern take on a maze game. A relatively new entry into the action game field is rhythm games, which likely started with Parappa the Rapper in Japan in 1996, followed by Dance Dance Revolution in 1998. Dance Dance Revolution is a game that actually requires the player to move their behinds off their chairs, so it was a bit of a surprise that it caught on. Anyway, rhythm games are musically themed games that require the player to do something such as step on a square, hit a button or tap a screen, in time with some visual cue that matches the background music. Games like Guitar Hero and Rock Band take the music theme seriously with specialized hardware that model musical instruments. And there are various games that make use of motion capture devices such as the Xbox Kinect or the Wii Nunchuck. Action games are what a lot of people think of when they hear the term video games. These games tend to have lots of blood-pumping action, great graphics, evocative music and sound effects, and twitch gameplay to keep you on your toes. However, action games tend to be played by youngsters who have the time and energy to invest in such games. As we get older, our responsibilities increase and our time and energy decreases, so our interests start to move away from action games and towards other genres that we will talk about in upcoming videos. Enjoy them while you can, everyone. Before you know it, you'll be an old fogey like me.